Hey guys! Tonight we dive headfirst into the sandstorm of ancient storytelling, an eerie, winding tale tucked inside the folds of 1001 Nights. You're not just hearing a story, you're in it. You trudge across the twilight edges of a fading desert, sun melting behind dunes like spilled gold. Every step, a crunch into warm, whispering dust. Your mouth is dry, your boots are filled with regret, and the nearest civilization, well, let's just say you passed that about 3 bad decisions ago. But just when the sand threatens to swallow you whole, you spot a flicker, a lantern swinging on the edge of a crumbling caravanserai, one of those roadside inns for merchants, travelers, and the occasional supernatural visitor. You push open its creaking wooden gate. A few tired camels grunt. Somewhere nearby, a pot boils. Inside, cloaked figures huddle around a fire, and there's murmuring low, rhythmic, like a prayer or a warning. You sit, you breathe, you survive. For now, so, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop a comment with your location and local time. I love knowing where you're all listening from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. The storyteller across from you is an old man with a beard like tangled smoke and eyes too sharp for someone who looks like he hasn't had sleep since the Abbasid Caliphate. He nods at you, as if he's been waiting. You know the tale of the merchant and the jinni? He asks. You nod politely, but no, you don't. Not really. So he begins. You're no longer in the caravanserai. You're following a different man entirely, a merchant, not so unlike yourself, whose only real crime was tossing a date pit too hard. Seriously. Historians still argue whether this bit is allegorical or just proof that dates were the ninja stars of their time. The merchant is on his way home, sacks full of goods, when he stops under a tree to rest. The date? He's just snacking. He spits the pit over his shoulder. That's when everything goes wrong. A jinni, massive, smoky, eyes glowing like twin coals, appears in a blur of sand and fury. You killed my son. It thunders. With a date pit. You, standing beside the merchant now, can't help but whisper, seriously? But the jinni isn't laughing. Here's a historical fun fact to soothe your rising panic. During the early Islamic Golden Age, jinn were often treated as metaphorical reflections of human vices or nature's untamed chaos. So basically, this guy, he's either a metaphor for grief or a deeply dramatic dad with an anger problem. The merchant tries reasoning. He begs. He offers his wealth, his livestock, his mustache wax collection, anything, but the jinni shrugs. No deal. Prepare to die. Enter. The first twist. Just as the blade is metaphorically or literally raised, an old man arrives, leading a leash. On the end of it, a beautiful deer. You blink. The merchant blinks. The jinni blinks. The old man clears his throat and says, wait, if I tell you a story stranger than this man's crime, will you spare his life? The jinni, clearly one for flair and folklore, agrees. 1/3 of the merchant's life hangs in the balance, and just like that, you sit down to listen to another story. It's stories within stories now, like nesting dolls with insomnia. The old man begins, and so do you. You're now in another time, another place, wandering through a quiet courtyard, where fig trees rustle above you, and the smell of rosewater clings to the air. You're married. Happily? Well, let's not spoil the suspense. Your wife is beautiful, intelligent, and Oh yes, secretly a sorceress. Because why not? You love her. But she's been distracted, cold, slipping away for hours, sometimes days, with vague excuses about visiting her aunt, or the marketplace was just that crowded. You're suspicious, but you trust her. Until you don't. Here comes the quirky tidbit. In some medieval versions of these tales, magical women were said to have entire underground chambers filled with enchanted birds that whispered secrets into their ears. Imagine trying to explain that in couples therapy. So you follow her, and what do you find? A man. Not just any man. A man who's, let's call it, emotionally close to your wife. You're heartbroken and very, very angry. You don't confront them. Not yet. You wait. And then you strike. Not with fists, but with magic of your own. You turn him into a cow. That's right. Moo. You sell the cow to a butcher. Then you turn her into a deer. And that deer, yeah, that's the one on the leash right now. Justice, the old man says with finality. And for that tale, I request 1/3 of this merchant's life be spared. The Jinnee strokes his chin, shrugs. Fine. You breathe out. 2/3 to go. You glance around. The night grows thicker, the fire lower. Someone snores gently in the corner. You're not sure if it's a traveler or something. Older, but the story, it's just getting warmed up, because someone else is approaching the circle. This time, a second old man. And he's not alone. 2 black dogs trail behind him, their eyes empty and their fur like midnight water. They sit. They say nothing. And the old man says, I, too, have a tale to tell. The second old man settles onto the rug, like he's part of the landscape. Sand-dusted robes, skin like sun-cracked parchment, and eyes that seem to have seen too much. Beside him, the 2 black dogs lower themselves with identical, unnerving grace. You stare at them, wondering, pets, guardians, or something worse. You don't have to wonder long. I will trade you a story, the old man says to the Jinnee. And if you find it strange enough, you'll spare another 1/3 of this merchant's life. The Jinnee nods once, the glow in his eyes flickering like a torch caught in a gust. So the old man begins. You see these dogs, he says, and one of them gives the faintest tail thump. They used to be my brothers. You shift where you sit. The merchant pales. And even the deer, yes, the deer, tilts her head. You're suddenly somewhere else again, traveling back into the past with this second man. Before the fur, before the curses, you're a merchant's son, born into moderate wealth, a solid reputation, and an early understanding that camels are the worst animals to argue with. There were 3 of you, brothers, the classic trio. You, the responsible eldest. The other 2, business-minded but impulsive. The kind who'd sell their share of the market to a pirate if he promised a shiny rock in return. Together, you ran a merchant business. Textiles, mostly, but also spices, dyes, the occasional definitely not cursed relic from a distant bazaar. For a while, things were smooth, but prosperity is a terrible glue. It dries fast and cracks easy. Fringe historical tidbit time. Some 10th century merchant guilds in Baghdad had complex oaths involving cups of ink, burning sandals, and promises to never be tempted by glowing fruit. You really have to admire their creativity. Anyway, back to the story. One day, your brothers announce they want to go abroad and trade. You try to stop them. We have enough. You say, let's stay stable. They scoff, call you old, paranoid. We'll be back in a year with twice the fortune. You watch them go. Wait. A year passes. Then 2. Then 5. No letters. No messages. Just silence. You assume the worst. You mourn. And then, being the responsible one, you keep building, expanding. You buy a ship of your own and prepare to travel not for riches, but to search for your lost brothers. Romantic. Right? Wrong. You find them. And they are, unsurprisingly, fine. Better than fine. They're thriving. But not because they're smart. Because they got lucky. Real estate in a port city. A stroke of good timing with a rare spice bloom. And some vague business about help from a blue-eyed stranger. Historians still argue whether this stranger was a disguised djinn or just a merchant with spectacular eyeliner. You want to believe they've matured, that they'll return home and help you rebuild what they once left. So you bring them back. They move in. They smile a lot. They hug you too often. You should have known, because not long after, while you sleep, they poison your food, not to kill you, but to rob you. They dump your unconscious body on a beach. Then they take everything. Your ships, your house, even the rug you liked in the entryway. You wake up with sand in your mouth, salt in your lungs, and betrayal tattooed across your spine. Enter the black dogs. Well, not yet. First, you wander. You live on scraps. You sleep beneath overturned carts. Then, one night, beneath a sky full of stars that seem to be laughing at you, a woman appears. She's not entirely human. Her eyes shift in the moonlight, and her voice sounds like wind in hollow bones. She doesn't ask questions. She simply says, "Come with me." Fringe magic lore from the 12th century. There's a Persian tale of moonwalkers, beings who live between shadows and reflections, offering favors in exchange for future silence. This woman feels like one of those. You follow her. She brings you to a palace made entirely of white marble and blue glass. Inside, jinn and spirits move silently, none of them touching the ground. You don't ask what happens if you offend them. You already suspect. There, she restores your wealth, not just returns it, but multiplies it. Why? She says she hates betrayal. And maybe, just maybe, she's impressed you survived your brothers. But what about them, you ask? And her smile freezes a little. She gives you a vial. Pour this on them. You don't ask what's in it. You find them days later, their new lives flourishing, their egos enormous. You do it. They turn. Fur grows, spines twist. Their screams fade into howls. 2 black dogs, silent and shamed, stare at you with the same eyes you once saw across the dinner table. You leash them, and you've been walking ever since, seeking forgiveness. Or maybe just someone who'll say, "Yes, that story's weird enough to spare a man's life." The genie thinks, rubs his chin again. He looks at the dogs, then at the deer, then at you. 2/3. He says, "Spared." You exhale. The merchant nearly collapses, but the night isn't done with you yet. A third old man approaches the fire. No pets, no deer, just a long cane, and eyes that glint like coins from a forgotten vault. You sense it before he speaks. This one's story, it's going to make the others feel like lullabies. The third old man steps into the circle, like someone entering a battlefield, slow, deliberate, and utterly unbothered by the glowing genie looming nearby. He doesn't flinch, doesn't bow, just taps his cane once, the sound echoing louder than it should in the dry desert air. "I, too, have a tale," he says, voice gravelly, as though it's been aged in oak. "And I think you'll find it inconveniently strange. No dogs, no deer, no magical women in glass palaces. Just a man, a cane, and a silence so thick it hushes the fire. You scoot a little closer, your spine tingling with a kind of anticipation you didn't ask for. You're starting to realize this is no ordinary campfire. This is courtroom, confessional, and execution platform all in one. The Jinni narrows his glowing eyes, but gestures tell it. If it satisfies me, the merchant lives. The old man lowers himself onto a low cushion, leans on his cane, and begins. You must understand, he says. My misfortune began with a love for books, and just like that, you're pulled away from the fire and into a house, a small, crooked, home-lined wall to wall with scrolls and manuscripts. It smells like old paper and bitter tea. There's an inkwell on every surface, and several cats that pretend they're not judging you. They are. You're in the city of Basra, maybe Baghdad. Historians still argue whether the original tale took place during the reign of Harun al-Rashid or one of his grandsons, but the energy is definitely Abbasid. Scholars, calligraphers, libraries so massive they required camels to deliver returns. You were a scholar, not a famous one. Not the kind whose name gets etched on buildings, but a quiet, obsessive one. Your world was filled with language, philosophy, logic, love. That wasn't on the agenda until she arrived. Let's call her Layla, because of course we are. She was selling ink in the market, or maybe saffron, or maybe she was just standing there, looking like trouble wrapped in silk. Either way, you talked, then talked more, then didn't stop. You fell hard. Layla was funny, sharp-tongued, and always one step ahead. She could quote poetry, bargain with merchants until they cried, and once convinced a tax collector to forgive your back payments because of academic importance. You should have known then she was dangerous. The quirky tidbit here? In 9th century Baghdad, there was a woman named Lubna who worked as both a scribe and a chess instructor, rumored to be so intelligent. She once bested 3 male scholars in debate while cooking lunch. Layla feels like her spiritual twin. Back to the tale. You married. You wrote poems on the inside of her wrist. She hid your books when she thought you needed sleep. It was good for about 6 months. Then came the mirror. It appeared in your home one morning. Not delivered, not purchased, just there, hanging in the hallway. It didn't reflect quite right. A second slower, slightly blurrier. You'd look into it and feel a tug, like your soul was leaning forward. Layla told you to ignore it. Antique, she said, brushing past it. Old family heirloom. You didn't remember it from before. One night, while she slept, you stared into the mirror and saw someone else. Not a stranger, you, but different, harder, wearing clothes you'd never worn, with a scar across your cheek you didn't have. You reached out. So did he. And just like that, everything changed. You woke up the next morning in a different house, a colder one. The walls were damp. Your books were gone. The cats were gone. Layla was gone. The mirror? Still there. Only now, it didn't reflect you anymore. It reflected him, the version of you that had taken your place. Fringe magical belief. In some North African folklore, mirrors are considered gateways to the opposite self, a being that exists only in reflection, waiting to switch places during moments of spiritual weakness or extreme self-doubt. What a terrifying customer service complaint that would be. You wandered, searching. No one recognized you. Even old friends looked past you, as if you were just air. You spent years learning how to reverse the magic, teaching yourself forgotten tongues, trading what little you had for scrolls written in the blood of eels. Don't ask. Until one day, in a crumbling ruin outside Mosul, you found a man with no face. He offered a choice: take revenge or take back your life. You chose the second. The spell he gave you was simple: burn a part of your former self. Literally, hair, nail, or tear. Then speak your true name aloud. You waited until nightfall, shaved your head, cried into the ashes, and whispered your name. The mirror cracked. The version of you in the reflection screamed, soundless and endless, and vanished. You woke up in your old bed. The books were back. The air smelled like home. Layla turned to you and smiled, but something was wrong. You were older. Years had passed, but you'd barely aged. She had. You'd missed time. And so had she. Whatever mirror world you'd visited, it didn't play fair with clocks. She never forgave you for vanishing. Never believed your story. You lived together after that, but always apart. She slept facing the wall. You wrote long, terrible poetry. And one morning, she was gone, left a note. If you ever find a mirror again, don't look. You've carried that cane ever since. Not because you need it, but because it's hollow. Inside is the mirror shard, just in case. The old man looks up from the fire. So, he says, is that enough? The Jinni considers, and smiles. Yes, it says. The merchant is free. A breath of wind moves through the circle, like an applause from invisible hands. The deer lifts her head. The black dogs pant. The third man taps his cane once. You think it's over, but it's not. Because the merchant, he still hasn't gone home. And you're still sitting at this fire. And Scheherazade, she's still telling stories. So you stay? Of course you do. Because just when you think the tale's wrapped neatly like a market parcel, 3 men, 3 tales, 1 narrowly spared merchant. The story takes a slow inhale, and out comes another thread. You're not back in your bed. You haven't blinked awake in your room, nestled beneath blankets and half-melted candle wax. You're still there, still crouched in the flickering half-circle of story and sand. The kind of space that obeys no laws of time. The air smells faintly of figs and something older, dust from books that were never written. And now, a woman's voice cuts through it all. Scheherazade, she speaks softly, like she's just turned a page. And because she's good, no, because she's legendary, she doesn't wait for applause. She just continues. You remember the merchant? Of course, she says. And now you do. He's still sitting, slack-jawed and blinking, like someone who accidentally stepped off a moving boat. The 3 old men have vanished. Their stories spent. The Jinni is gone too, swallowed back into whatever supernatural bureaucracy it came from. And the merchant, he has no idea what just happened. But you do. You saw the transformation. How stories twisted the thread of fate itself. And now, as the merchant rises and walks home, blinking into a sunrise he didn't earn, you follow. Because Scheherazade won't let you go just yet. Not until you understand the price of a life spared. You trail him back to his city, bustling, loud, and dangerously normal. Historians still argue whether the city of these tales was meant to be Cairo, Damascus, or a stylized version of ancient Baghdad. Each version claims a different skyline, but in every telling, it has the same bones: narrow alleys, layered architecture, and people who are very interested in each other's business. The merchant returns to his house, which is absurdly large. Rich carpets, cool stone halls, servants who flit about like shadows. He doesn't speak for 3 days. He doesn't eat for 2, and he doesn't sleep at all. Because the truth is, When you're spared from death by a story, it doesn't mean you're free. It means you owe. You owe the tale that saved you. You owe the silence that didn't fall. And that kind of debt follows you like a second shadow. The merchant paces, rereads old ledgers, tries to distract himself with shipments of saffron and sandalwood. But it doesn't work. The fourth night, he dreams of the genie again. And the next morning, he does the only thing a rational man in a fairy tale would do. He books passage on a boat and sails away. Now here's your historical fact. Trade by sea during the Islamic Golden Age wasn't some rickety affair. It was big business. Arab and Persian merchants dominated maritime routes between East Africa, India, and China. They didn't just move spices. They moved ideas, books, glassware, perfume, even, believe it or not, ostrich eggs. Your merchant, he isn't running. Not exactly. He tells himself he's going on a pilgrimage. Or maybe it's just time to see the world. That's what you say when you're being hunted by dreams and don't want to admit it. He boards a ship headed toward India. And that's when he meets her. Now pause. You're expecting magic, right? Some floating princess. A feathered cloak. A voice that shimmers. Nope. She's barefoot, swearing at a sailor. And she's winning. You don't catch her name at first. Nobody does. But she's loud, clever, and smells faintly of orange blossom and fire. She's not a merchant. Not officially. She's a traveler. A collector of rumors. A buyer of stories. When she finds out your merchant was once cursed by a genie and lived, she doesn't laugh. She leans in and whispers, "You're marked." Then, and he says, "By what?" And she answers, "By story." That's the thing no one tells you. Magic isn't just spells and potions. It's narrative gravity. Once you've been pulled into a tale, it wants you. You can't just wander off and become a spice importer in Calicut. You're a character now. And characters get dragged back in. They dock in a port where the buildings are painted in bright colors and monkeys argue loudly on rooftops. Somewhere between loading crates and dodging pickpockets, the woman offers him a deal. "I collect stories," she says. "Rare ones. Yours might be worth more than a barrel of sapphires." "And what do I get?" the merchant asks. "A way out," she says. He follows her, because of course he does. Here's your quirky tidbit. In parts of southern India, sailors believed in whispering trees, giant banyans that could steal your voice if you passed under them without a blessing. Not ghosts, not demons, just trees with a taste for gossip. Think twice before you picnic in their shade. The merchant and his unnamed companion travel inland. Their destination, a ruined palace swallowed by the jungle. Locals avoid it, claiming it's cursed. But her? She seems drawn to it. The palace is overgrown, vines curling like greedy fingers around cracked marble, statues with missing eyes, pools filled with green water, and frogs that sound sarcastic. Inside, carved into the walls, are words in languages older than sand, stories etched in spirals, visible only in moonlight. And in the center, a great empty hall, where the air tastes metallic. "This," she says, "is where stories rest." The merchant doesn't understand until he sees it. A book. Not just any book. His book, laid open, glowing faintly. Pages blank. She hands him a quill. "Write," she says. "Finish the tale, or the tale will finish you." Here's where it gets weird. As he writes, about the 3 old men, the dogs, the deer, the mirror shard. The words vanish from the page, then reappear, but different, names altered, endings shifted. Suddenly, the deer doesn't turn back. One of the dogs bites the old man. The mirror breaks, but cuts Layla's hand. Each time he writes, the story fights back. Why, he asks. She looks sad. Because every story costs something. That's the thing. Magic has rules. But stories? They have appetites, and when you live inside one, you're not always the author. Eventually, exhausted, he collapses, and when he wakes, the woman is gone. The book is closed, and the palace is silent. He stumbles out into the dawn, unsure of whether he's finished the story or become a footnote in someone else's. And you, still sitting by that fire, realize something unnerving. You're in that story now, too. You walk for hours, maybe days. The jungle recedes slowly, clinging to your ankles like it's not quite ready to let you go. The ruined palace vanishes behind you without fanfare. No collapse, no shimmer, no final gust of magic wind. It's just gone. And you're back in the world, or at least something that resembles it. The road ahead smells like wet clay and cardamom. A goat bleats somewhere off to your left, very offended by something no one else can see. You hear the clatter of pots, laughter filtered through woven fabric, the distant thud of someone chopping wood, in a rhythm that sounds a little too deliberate, like maybe they're carving a curse into every log. You follow it. You always do. And you end up in a village, not one you recognize from any map. It doesn't matter. They never put the important places on maps anyway. This one curls around itself like a coiled rope. Little stone homes, open-air kitchens, wide-eyed children who stare like they've seen you in a dream before. The air is thick with the scent of frying onions and fresh rain, which, if we're being honest, should be bottled and sold. You find lodging in a corner house with a creaky floor and a host who says nothing, just hands you a bowl of stew and disappears. You eat it. You sleep. And when you wake up, you realize the woman is back, not in the room. Of course, that'd be too easy. But her presence is unmistakable, like a shadow that arrives before the sun does. There's a mark on your hand now, a spiral, drawn in ink or ash, or something older. It itches, faintly, like it's remembering something. You step outside and hear laughter. Not children this time. Deeper, stranger. You follow the sound through the village, past a row of fig trees, and into a clearing where a circle of people sit cross-legged around a low fire. One of them is telling a story, and you freeze because it's your story. They laugh at the dog, groan when the deer vanishes, gasp at the appearance of the second old man. But it's your rhythm, your pauses, your breath, the same way you told it on the page in that ruined palace, even if the details are wrong. In this version, the merchant doesn't survive. In this version, the dogs talk. And in this version, the third man, well, let's just say he doesn't turn out so well. When the storyteller finishes, they all look up at you at once, not angrily, not accusingly, like witnesses, or maybe readers. Here's a historical fact to keep your brain busy. Oral storytelling in the medieval Islamic world wasn't just entertainment. It was serious business. Hakawadis, or storytellers, were often celebrities. People would pack into markets just to hear them weave epics, like Antar or the Adventures of Sinbad. Some were even paid by royalty to perform on demand. In some cases, storytellers could sway political sentiment, influence decisions, or, if they were too good, get themselves quietly removed. You sit with them. What else can you do? They pass a jug of something warm and spiced. You sip. You smile. You try not to scream when someone reaches out and touches the spiral on your hand. It's open now, they say. What is? The book. What book? But they're already laughing again. Moving on to the next tale. One about a fisherman who finds a brass jar in the sea. Inside is something ancient, something angry, and something about that feels familiar, doesn't it? Because stories echo. They slide from mouth to mouth, changing shape, picking up bits of the people who hold them. You think you're hearing something new, but you're not. It's all just the same current, looping around again with a new coat of paint. You try to leave the village the next morning, but the road is gone. No, really, it's not blocked. It's not washed out. It's just not there. Only fields, and then forest, and then, somewhere in the distance, the silhouette of something large and breathing. You don't investigate. You're tired, and maybe afraid. You stay in the village for 3 more days. On the 4th night, you're woken by a knock. She's back. This time, her face is veiled. Not dramatically. Just a thin scarf, enough to catch the moonlight. Her eyes are the only part visible, and they are amused. "You're not done," she says. "I finished the story." You reply. She laughs. You finished a story. You want to argue. But then she opens her hand, and there it is again. The book, still blank, still waiting. That's the thing. Remember, tales in this world don't end. They just spiral. Historians still argue whether 1001 Nights was ever meant to have a conclusion. Some manuscripts stop mid-sentence. Others loop back. And some add endings centuries after the original authors were long gone. You follow her again, this time into the fields, where a new city waits, not built of stone, but tents, silk stretched over carved poles, lanterns shaped like stars, and everywhere music. It's a traveling market, or maybe a mirage. But the people inside act like it's the center of the universe. You walk past a man selling maps that change as you look at them. A woman with a basket full of clocks, each one ticking in a different tongue. You hear the clink of bronze coins, the hiss of cooking oil, the soft rustle of someone whispering your name when no one's around. And in the center of it all is a tent covered in feathers. She leads you inside. There's no furniture, just cushions, incense smoke, and a low table with 3 objects: a mirror, a bell, and a coin. She gestures. Choose one. What happens if I pick wrong? There is no wrong, just layers. You reach out and pick the mirror, and then everything vanishes. Not explodes, not implodes, just ceases, and you're back in a palace. Not the overgrown one, not your home, a new one. Empty, vast, beautiful, except you're alone, and you're holding the book. And this time, the page isn't blank. It says in faint ink, "He chose the mirror." You flip to the next page. And then, he began again. You try to scream, but no sound comes. The bell on the table, wherever that table now is, rings faintly in your mind. You're trapped, or maybe cast, and somewhere far away, someone else is telling your story. You stare at the book in your hands, its cover warm and pulsing like something alive. The last line still echoes in your head. And then, he began again. The palace around you is no longer a ruin, but a glowing expanse of marble and stained glass, with ceilings that stretch like the sky, and windows that show nothing but endless night. There are no doors, no servants, no music, just you, the book, and a feeling crawling under your skin that someone or something is watching. You try to read ahead, flipping through the fragile pages, but the ink vanishes as you turn them. The story doesn't want to be rushed. That's the rule. And for a second, you're almost certain you hear a voice. Hers again, whispering from the ceiling, or maybe the floor. If you skip ahead, you lose the thread. So you wait. The mirror you chose still glimmers faintly in your mind. You remember the way it reflected nothing. Not your face, not the tint, just a kind of silver swirl, like moonlight dropped in water. You wonder what would have happened if you'd picked the bell or the coin. Would you have woken up in a different palace? Or maybe never woken up at all? A low hum vibrates through the floor. Something is arriving. You move toward the center of the room, where a stone basin rises from the floor, its surface rippling like liquid glass. As you approach, the book in your hands opens itself to a blank page, and words begin to appear, not written, but etched like lightning across the surface. They tell a tale, not of you this time, but of a prince, one who once ruled a city hidden beneath the sea. His skin is scaled with pearl, his eyes black as ink, and he commands fish like armies. Historians often argue about the origins of these submerged kingdoms in early Islamic storytelling. Some claim they're metaphors for lost knowledge. Others say they reference actual sunken civilizations described in sailors' logs and obscure regional legends. The sea, after all, is the greatest editor. It erases most of what it devours. You watch the story unfold in the basin. The prince falls in love with a woman who wears no veil and speaks only in riddles. They share a year together, and then she vanishes, leaving only a comb carved from bone and a warning carved into the walls of his chamber. Dunan Turas, the surface, the prince, heartbroken and reckless, orders his city to rise from the ocean. And it does. Sort of. A towering spire of coral and drowned marble pushes up from the sea. But it isn't the city he remembers. It's older, angrier, and at the very top stands the woman. Except now, she has no face. You blink, and the image in the basin ripples, distorting. It's your reflection now. No Carl, no prince, just your own eyes, staring back in confusion. Then, the water begins to rise. Fast. It spills over the basin's edge and pours across the marble floor, covering your feet, then your ankles. Climbing with unsettling purpose, you try to step back, but your legs don't listen. The water climbs higher, cold and strangely dry. And then you're falling, not drowning, just descending, as if the palace itself has dropped into the sea. When you land, it's in a cavern lit by floating lanterns. The walls pulse with veins of glowing stone. And ahead of you, resting on a slab of wet granite, are the two black dogs, the same ones from the story. Their eyes reflect the lantern light like wet coins. They don't bark. They don't growl. They just watch. You approach slowly, the book still clutched in your hand like a shield. The dogs rise in unison. One steps forward and lowers its head. You think it's going to attack, but instead, it speaks. "You are early," it says. Its voice is gravel wrapped in velvet, low and unnervingly human. "I didn't know I was coming," you reply. The second dog circles you. "Then, you are even earlier than we thought." "Where am I?" The first dog snorts, still asking the wrong questions. The second sits beside the slab and gestures with its paw. "Read to us." You hesitate, but the book has already opened again. This time, it shows the story of a man turned into a beast, not by magic, not by punishment, but by grief. Oh, he loses his brother, and with him, his sense of self. He stops speaking, stops eating, and then one day, he walks into the woods and comes out a dog. The two black dogs watch you closely. That one," says the first, "was our beginning." You don't ask if they mean it literally. You don't want to know. Fun fact, there are actual records of storytellers in Cairo's 14th century bazaars performing tales with trained animals. Black dogs were considered both bad omens and sacred protectors depending on the region. Some thought they guarded the gates of the ancient treasure. Others believed they housed restless jinn. "Yeah, we were men," says the second dog, its tone wistful now. Until the tale demanded otherwise. "You close the book." "Can I leave?" They tilt their heads in perfect synchronicity. "Not until the story turns." You don't know what that means, but the air begins to shift, and the lanterns blink out one by one. Then darkness, then a voice. Not the dog's, not hers, yours. Reading the exact story you just saw. And suddenly you realize what they meant. You're the narrator now. You hear your own voice echoing softly through the dark, detached from your lips, as if some invisible speaker plays it on a delay. You say words you haven't read yet, lines of the story you're supposed to be telling. Well, we already have. You can't quite tell anymore. It loops and layers until your ears throb gently with the rhythm of your own storytelling. But the words keep pouring, dragging you forward. You're back in the tent, but not quite. The velvet walls now shimmer with stars that pulse and shift. This isn't a tent anymore. It's a theater, a memory, a trap. The book hovers in front of you, open and glowing faintly, and you watch as new text appears across the page. The second old man and the two black dogs. That's your cue. You sit down, cross-legged on a soft rug that seems to unfold itself beneath you like a blossoming flower. You feel strangely calm now, like the kind of calm you might feel before taking a leap from a great height, aware of the fall, accepting of the impact. So, you begin to speak again. Once upon a time, you say, because of course that's how it begins. The second old man wasn't always old. He had a brother, a greedy, brilliant, restless brother, the kind who could charm snakes and talk merchants into selling their camels for the price of a shoe. Together, they ran a thriving business, dealing in rare goods, ambergris from the sea, firewood that burned blue, and once, a single glove stolen from a jinn's corpse. This is where you slip in a fact to anchor yourself. In real Abbasid trade routes, strange items like these did move through the markets. The most valuable goods were often things people didn't need, but desperately wanted. Unicorn horn, phoenix feathers, memory spices. Some scholars debate whether these items were literal or metaphorical. Others say people just loved a good story more than they loved gold. But your tale doesn't end in prosperity. You keep going. Your voice now a current pulling the story along. The brothers grew wealthy. Too wealthy. And the second old man, let's just call him you for now, since it's easier that way, you decided to leave for a time, to travel, to learn. You trusted your brother. You left him with everything. You came back a year later and found ruin. The shop was gone. The home was burned. The once charming brother had squandered it all on women, wine, and a magical bird that turned out to be a very expensive chicken wearing a tiara. Your brother wept at your feet. You, like a fool, forgave him. You rebuilt everything, worked your fingers raw, and when the wealth returned, you swore never to leave again. But your brother, he had other plans. One night, while you slept, he chained you, dragged you from your bed, took everything again. And this time, he didn't leave you in ruin. He left you in a desert, with nothing, for days. You wandered, throat a dust bowl, stomach an echo. You finally collapsed, ready to die. And that's when the dogs came. They weren't dogs then. Not yet. They were just two shapes in the heat haze. They could have been mirages, but they were real. And they dragged you, literally by the ankles, out of the desert, and into a cave that smelled of ink and honey. There, a woman waited, not young, not old, eyes like scrolls. She fed you dates soaked in goat's milk and told you she was a binder, a keeper of lost men and lost stories. She had found your tale interesting, which you thought was a strange way to describe your misery. She made you a deal. If you gave up your voice for a year, she would make your brother suffer in kind. You agreed. You would have agreed to anything. What you didn't know, what she didn't mention, was that the dogs weren't just dogs. They were men. Men who had once asked her for justice too. You pause here, in the tent, in the theater, in the place that's no longer anywhere. You've been speaking for so long. Your throat feels thick. You look down, and the black dogs are beside you again, silent, waiting. One of them licks your hand. It's weirdly comforting. If your therapist could see this, she'd probably tell you you're externalizing guilt again. Now comes the quirky tidbit, the kind that would never make it into a school book, but totally deserves to. During the Fatimid Caliphate, there was reportedly a real order of women scribes in Egypt who worked only at night and spoke only in proverbs. They recorded strange dreams for wealthy patrons and claimed these dreams were messages from ancestors. Historians still argue whether these women were state-sanctioned priestesses or a very clever scam. Anyway, back to you. The binder woman told you there would be a cost. Of course. There always is. Magic isn't a vending machine. It's a loan with terrible interest rates. In your case, the cost wasn't your life or your soul. It was your future. You'd never speak again. At least, not as yourself. Not in your world. But your story would be preserved. Heard again and again. And maybe, one day, understood. She gave you two things. A small mirror with no reflection, and two companions, your silent sentinels, who would follow you until your tale was finished. That was centuries ago. And now here you are, telling the story. You feel the floor shift beneath you. Not literally, emotionally, as if the walls have decided the scene is over. The stars fade from the tent fabric. The dogs vanish with a shimmer, like breath on cold glass. You're alone again. But the book is still open, and the pages are turning. You're not sure whether you've stood up, or the floor has dissolved beneath you. Either way, you're moving. The stars that once shimmered across the velvet tent now trail ahead of you, like breadcrumbs in deep space. Faint lights in an infinite dark. You follow them not because you trust them, but because they're all you've got. The book drifts beside you, still open, its pages fluttering in a wind that doesn't touch your skin. You pass through a doorway that wasn't there a moment ago. No hinges, no frame, just an opening in the dark, like reality blinked and forgot to finish rendering. On the other side, the court of the king. Yes, that king. The one you haven't seen for a few sections now. He's back, staring straight ahead, unmoving. You'd think he was carved from sandstone, if it weren't for the way his eyes blink slowly. Like a lizard sunbathing in the silence, Scheherazade is still beside him, serene as ever, her voice weaving through the room like smoke. You realize, with a little jolt, that the words coming from her mouth are yours. Or not yours. The ones you've just told. It's hard to separate anymore, but her story hasn't ended. Not yet. And you're pulled right into the next chapter, because you're still her audience too. The king, curious, skeptical, indulgent, turns to the second old man and asks, "And how did you come to meet the first one?" And here comes the connective tissue, the part the storytellers love, because it turns scattered tales into one epic braid. You're now in a caravan. That same second old man, you remember, is trudging across sand dunes on foot, two black dogs trailing behind him, tongues lolling like tired bodyguards. You've been traveling for months. No destination. Just a vague promise that somewhere, someone needs to hear your story. The desert is full of strangers who act like old friends. Every oasis brings a new tale, new dangers, new reasons to doubt that this journey has an end at all. You meet a man who claims to have married a Rakio, another who insists he met Solomon once, but couldn't understand a word he said, because Solomon only speaks to spirits and bees. Historians still debate whether these wandering desert tales originated from real travelers, or if they were seeded by professional storytellers looking to pad the silences between major stories. The truth? Probably both. Human beings are gossiping animals. We fill in blanks with myth because silence terrifies us. One night, as you're setting up camp near the broken pillars of what might have been an ancient temple, or just someone's very elaborate sandcastle, you hear music, soft, winding, like someone playing a flute underwater. You find the source. A man sitting cross-legged by a dying fire, playing an ocarina carved from bone. He looks familiar. Then he speaks, and you know why. It's the first old man. Yes, the one with the dear wife, still wrapped in a cloak, too long for his body, still carrying that silver cane etched with symbols that never quite hold still. You sit with him. The black dogs curl at your feet, sighing, as if they recognize something sacred about this moment. The first old man doesn't ask your name. He doesn't need to. Strange how we find each other, he says, not looking at you. The broken ones, you nod. You both sit for hours, trading silences like they're a rare currency. And then, when the moon is at its highest, he asks, "Do you want to come with me to see the king?" You don't ask which king. You just agree. Because somewhere inside you, a thread tugs, pulling you toward a place where your voice might matter, even if it no longer belongs to you. That's how you arrive at the palace. You walk through gold gates that shimmer like heat mirages. Servants stare but don't speak. Even the black dogs step lighter here, their paws making no sound on the tiled floors. And here's your mainstream historical fact, something real to cling to. In Abbasid-era Baghdad, the caliph's court employed professional storytellers to entertain, educate, and sometimes distract. They weren't just performers. They were social navigators, subtly shaping the politics of the day. Some even traveled with guards, because a well-told story could change public opinion. And that made them dangerous. So you and the first old man step into this long tradition, though neither of you would call it that. You're here to plead for mercy, not to entertain. You kneel before the king, and the black dogs do too. The king listens, Scheherazade listens, and, bizarrely, so do the birds perched in the high rafters of the hall. Silent, jewel-colored creatures that don't blink, only lean forward, as if the story matters to them more than anything. Now for your quirky tidbit. In certain medieval Arab texts, birds are said to carry the souls of storytellers who died mid-sentence. Until the story is completed, they remain trapped in feathers and bone. Some believed you could free them by speaking their final words aloud, in a room where no one was listening but you and the wind. You're not sure if these birds are here for that reason, but you can't stop glancing at them. The king is quiet for a long time after your tale ends. Then he says, "If your story is true, then your brother deserves punishment. But I must test your tale," which is classic royal behavior. Really, kings love tests. Keeps them feeling like they're in charge. He turns to the executioner and says, "Bring me a basin of enchanted water and a blade that can cut lies from truth." Historians still argue whether this phrase was metaphorical, or if it referred to an actual ritual tool. Perhaps some hallucinogenic oil or smoke that revealed a person's guilt through visions or induced confessions. You wait, you don't protest. You've been through worse. But just before the executioner returns, Scheherazade raises a finger. "Your Majesty," she says gently, "perhaps it is better to hear the third man's story before you make your judgment. There may be more truth woven through these three than through anyone alone." The king nods slowly. He likes patterns. He likes the number 3. Most rulers do. And so, once more, you're made to wait. But now you're part of something bigger. A tapestry forming from mismatched threads. You feel the story building around you, thickening like dusk. And even though you know you're still in danger, still bound by old deals and voiceless bargains, something shifts. For the first time in years, you feel seen. The dogs lean gently against your side. The first old man's hand rests on your shoulder. And somewhere deep in the palace walls, a third voice begins to speak. The third old man begins to speak, his voice soft, like sand spilling through an hourglass. And you, still kneeling beside the other two, listen with the kind of attention only the desperate and the sleepless can manage. The king leans forward on his throne, bored no longer, intrigued perhaps, or simply savoring the final tale in this strange trio of pleading men. This third man carries no dogs, no staffs, no grand air. He's not bent by tragedy, not cloaked in robes, heavy with metaphor. He looks ordinary, unsettlingly so, like he could be your neighbor or the guy who sells you dates in the marketplace. But then he says, I had 2 brothers, and they ruined me. Ah, here we go again. More brothers. You're starting to notice a pattern. And frankly, if you ever get a brother in this life, you might just request a return policy. Anyway, back to the story. The third man's tale begins in a bustling port city, not unlike Basra. Though he doesn't name it, he ran a merchant ship, proud and full of spices, bolts of dyed silk, and crates of things too shiny to be practical. His brothers were not merchants. They were opportunists, drifting in and out of schemes like fish, darting between shadows, always just on the edge of something dangerous. Still, when they begged to come along on a trading voyage, he agreed. Because brothers, because optimism, because the tragic arc always begins with a yes that should have been a firm get lost. Here's your historical nugget. Maritime trade during the Islamic Golden Age was no small thing. These merchant voyages weren't 2-day fishing trips. They were multi-month odysseys across the Indian Ocean, with monsoon winds guiding dhows and fat-bottomed vessels from East Africa to Gujarat to China's southern ports. Arab merchants were early globalists, navigating not just waters, but languages, currencies, and customs. These weren't just traders. They were culture shapers. So the 3 brothers set sail. And for a while, things went well. Their ship danced across turquoise waters. Cargo holds full, bellies fuller. They sold goods in Zanzibar, loaded incense in Socotra, and drank something mildly illegal with a prince who claimed his grandfather rode a dragon into battle. The third man's brothers acted like princes, spending coin like it burned their fingers. They courted women with poetry they didn't write, promised goods they didn't own, and made deals they didn't understand. The third man, our storyteller, cleaned up their messes again and again, always whispering, "Just this once, just until we return home." But of course, they never returned home. One night, in a small harbor somewhere south of Hormuz, the brothers drugged him. Classic betrayal cocktail. pomegranate wine, heavy on the sleepy spices. When he woke, he was tied to a raft, floating just outside the bay, the ship already a memory on the horizon. They left him with one paddle, a single water skin, and a small bag of figs. No gold, no ship, no name, because they also took that too, forging papers that said he'd died of a fever in a port he'd never visited. You'd think he'd die there, right? Raft, sea, sharks, a sunstroke. It's a buffet of fatal endings. But no, he was found by her. Let's call her Layla, though she probably went by a name lost in salt and centuries. She was part of a tribe that fished with kites and hunted pearls by moonlight. People said her eyes could charm birds out of trees and secrets out of thieves. Layla didn't speak when she found him, just dragged his nearly dead body ashore, pressed a salve that smelled like mint and smoke to his lips, and watched as life trickled back into him. They say falling in love is a slow burn. This wasn't. It was a firestorm. He stayed with her for 1 full year, living in a village that didn't exist on any map, learning a language of glances and shadows, building boats not with nails, but by singing the wood into shape. Historians still argue whether such sea villages truly existed, isolated water communities passed over by cartographers because they moved like clouds. Some think they were real, nomadic flotillas that used shallow draft vessels to stay hidden in mangroves and lagoons. Others say they're just stories told by shipwrecked men who didn't want to admit they'd cried the whole time. Anyway, Layla had one rule: never open the painted jar beneath her bed. Of course, he opened it, you want to slap him. You really do. Because every story comes with one sacred line you're not supposed to cross. And these men, these old fools, just can't help but stumble over it, like it's some divine invitation to chaos. Inside the jar, a single feather, pale gold, humming softly, almost alive. Layla returned just in time to see him holding it. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She only whispered, "You could have stayed." Then she took the feather, whispered something into it, and vanished. Not stepped outside, not ran away, just vanished. Like smoke exhaling from the corner of a dream. And then the village vanished too, gone. Overnight, like a mirage at sunrise. No footprints, no boat songs, just sand and silence. The third man wandered for days, maybe weeks. Eventually he made it back to civilization, half mad, sunburnt, and suddenly very, very rich. Because Layla, even in her fury, had left him a parting gift, a pouch filled with blue diamonds, hard as sin, and twice as pretty. With that, he rebuilt, became a scholar, learned 7 languages, trained a talking parrot that corrected his grammar. But then, years later, he found his brothers again. They were drunk in a tavern, boasting about the ship they'd once commanded, laughing about how easy it was to erase a man from the world. He didn't curse them, didn't fight, just watched them from across the room, then left. The next morning, they were dogs. He doesn't say how, doesn't explain if it was a curse he cast, or one that Layla left curled like a snake around his fate. Just says they were there, in his courtyard, whining and confused. No memory, just instincts, just punishment, and I've kept them. The third man finishes, nodding toward the pair of black dogs at his feet. Not as pets, not even as penance, just because. You look over. One of the dogs has laid its head down. The other stares straight ahead, glassy-eyed, like it's dreaming of better days or better crimes. The king doesn't speak. Neither does Scheherazade. But you can feel the air change. Something final just settled in this room, like dusk settling into the bones of a building. The three men, yourself included, kneel quietly. And the king, at last, raises his hand. The king sits back, fingers steepled under his chin, gaze heavy with the weight of too many stories, too many strange requests, and perhaps just a little regret. He looks from the first old man, still clutching the rope of his weeping dogs, to the second, whose eyes never stop flicking from shadow to shadow, to the third, calm and quiet, with his silent, black-eyed companions. And then finally, he looks at you. You feel it in your stomach first. That slow, tight twist. You can't read his face. That's the thing about kings. Their expressions are practiced, carved into them like inscriptions on old tombs, meant to mean everything and nothing all at once. But then he speaks. "You've all told your tales," he says, voice like thunder that forgot to raise its volume. "And in truth, I've heard enough oddities for 10 lifetimes." He leans forward slightly. You catch the glint of something curious in his eyes, almost amusement. "I promised that if your stories moved me, I would spare the merchant." And so, a pause, the longest pause in the world. "I will." You don't cheer. You don't move. You just exhale, like someone who's been holding their breath for 300 years. The merchant collapses forward, face in his hands, letting out a sound that is part sob, part laughter, part spiritual rebirth. The three old men bow deeply, their dogs respectfully lowering their heads, which is impressive for canines that used to be tax evaders or whatever. The king stands. "Take your lives," he says, waving a hand as if brushing dust from silk. "Go. But remember, not every tale ends with mercy. Some end where they began, in silence. Now, let's pause for a brief, sleep-tinted historical aside. This kind of high-stakes tale bargaining isn't just a literary device from the 1001 Nights. It has echoes in real legal traditions. In some ancient Islamic courts, storytelling or poetry could be used, formally or informally, to sway judges. Persian courts in particular celebrated the power of language. A well-timed verse might not get you out of a beheading, but it could earn you sympathy, delay, or favor. Justice, especially among kings, wasn't always about rules. It was about impressions. And you're still kneeling, still trying to figure out how exactly you ended up in this royal tent of stories, curses, and improbable survival. But something deeper is settling in now. You feel it in your chest, not just relief, but awe. These men, these broken, battered souls, spoke themselves into salvation. They turned their trauma into currency. They gambled with memory and won with metaphor, which brings us back to Scheherazade. Yes, you remember her, still standing there, veiled and silent, like a shadow made of thought. She's been in the room this whole time, a specter at the edge of the firelight. Now, she steps forward, not too close, just enough. The king notices. "And you," he says, "still here?" "Yes, Majesty," she replies, voice soft as saffron. "You've heard their tales," he says. "I have. Do you believe them?" And here, her pause is deliberate. Her eyes flick to you, just for a heartbeat, and then back to the king. "I believe that belief is not required for truth to matter." The king narrows his eyes, not angry, just intrigued. "Speak clearly." Scheherazade's smile is slow, like sunrise over broken city walls. They told their truths, or at least the truth they could carry. That's what matters. That's how we survive. The room is quiet again. And if you thought the tension had left with the death sentence, think again. This is something different now. Not survival, but philosophy. Meaning, the aftertaste of fear once the knife is sheathed. You're not the only one wondering what the king will do with that kind of answer. But to your surprise, he doesn't lash out. He doesn't scoff or punish. He just nods. Once. And interesting, that's all. Scheherazade bows slightly, then retreats. And again, you wonder what game she's playing. Because this isn't just a bystander. This is a woman who's been standing in the storm without getting wet. You and the other 3 men are ushered out. The merchant leans heavily on you, still shaken. The old men walk like ghosts that just remembered they were once alive. The dogs, quiet as statues. You exit through thick velvet curtains that brush your face like soft warning. Outside, the night is cool, the sky dusted with stars. Somewhere, a lute plays. You can smell lamb roasting, mingled with mint, dates, and the faintest trace of sea air. You want to rest. You want to eat. But mostly, you want to remember every word that just passed between those walls. Because something tells you this isn't the end of the story. Not by a long shot. Now, here's a quirky little tidbit before sleep overtakes you. In some versions of these tales, the 3 old men weren't old at all. They were young tricksters using illusion magic to make themselves appear ancient. Because age, back then, came with automatic credibility. You want someone to believe you've seen things? Slap on a fake beard and start coughing about the price of bread 50 years ago. It worked then. Still kinda works now, honestly. As you walk through the moonlit garden outside the palace, the merchant finally speaks. I thought I was done. He says, I thought that was it. You nod, because what else is there to say? But deep down, you know better now. Because what the king gave you wasn't just mercy, it was warning. Because stories don't just save lives, they also remember them. You wake before dawn. The palace gardens are soaked in blue mist. Trees bowed in reverent silence, and the crescent moon is melting into the horizon, like a secret being whispered into the sky. You stretch, bones cracking like ancient scrolls, unfurling, and blink away the lingering traces of last night's tension. But let's be real. You've had some strange mornings in your life, but waking up alive after being nearly executed and hearing 3 men explain why their dogs are actually cursed brothers, that's gotta make the top 3. Beside you, the merchant is still asleep, snoring with the raw satisfaction of someone who cheated death and dreams only of figs and forgiveness. The 3 old men are gone. No trace, not even a paw print in the gravel. Either they vanished into the morning fog, or they've returned to whatever cursed provinces spawned them in the first place. Good for them. You stand, wander a bit, find yourself back at the palace courtyard, where a servant quietly offers you water and something resembling bread. It's dry. Like, offensively dry. You chew through it anyway, like grateful not to be chewing dirt 6 feet under instead. And then you hear it. Soft footfalls, the rustle of silks, and she appears. Scheherazade. She's alone this time. No guards or fanfare. Just a calm presence like wind, moving through tall grass. Her gaze finds yours with uncanny ease. I thought you might still be here, she says. You raise an eyebrow. You say that like I had a choice. She smiles faintly. You always have a choice. Most just make it too late. You're not sure whether that's philosophy or a threat. But either way, you're too tired to argue. She walks slowly, and you fall in step beside her, like characters already mid-chapter. The palace is waking, servants whispering past like ghosts with laundry. kitchen smoke, rising in fragrant ribbons. Scheherazade doesn't look at you as she speaks next. You heard their stories. What did you learn? You think for a moment. That curses make terrible birthday gifts. She actually laughs. It's a quiet, reluctant thing. The kind of laugh that hasn't seen sunlight in a while. Then she nods, and her tone shifts. Stories keep us alive, she says. Even when no one believes us. Even when we don't believe ourselves. You walk in silence for a few more minutes. Then she stops at a mosaic-tiled fountain, water trickling over silvered stone. Ah, my father is the vizier, she says, almost absently. He taught me words before he taught me numbers. He said math can buy power. But stories build kingdoms. You're not sure what to say. You're still processing that this woman, who stood like a statue during last night's drama, is now peeling back her layers like ancient papyrus. I'm not supposed to speak to guests, she continues, but I needed to see if you were still thinking. Most people leave a royal pardon with nothing but prayers and a hangover. You think about that. Really think. And then you ask, why are you telling me this? And she says, because soon I'll be the one telling stories. Pause. Now, here's your required historical snack. In the oldest known manuscripts of 1001 Nights, Scheherazade's backstory is nearly non-existent. She's just dropped into the scene as the vizier's daughter, already willing to marry a serial killer king to stop him from executing a new bride each dawn. Scholars debate endlessly about why her origins are so vague. Was she invented purely as a framing device, a stand-in for oral tradition itself? Or was she once the heroine of a lost tale, forgotten by time, but remembered by the cadence of her name? Historians still argue whether the character of Scheherazade was modeled after real oral historians, or whether she was a myth shaped by the need for feminine heroism in an otherwise patriarchal literary landscape. Either way, her voice outlasts every sword in the room. Back in the palace courtyard, Scheherazade turns back to you. I have to go, she says. There's a wedding to prepare. That short sentence knocks the wind out of you. You blink. Wait, your wedding? She nods once. No trace of joy in it. Tonight. To him? To the king. Your stomach flips, like a poorly anchored camel in a sandstorm. You can't be serious. Her eyes settle on yours. I am deadly. You stammer something. Maybe a protest. Maybe a curse. Maybe a question with no punctuation. But she's already walking away. Her veil catches the breeze, and for a moment, she looks like a shadow painted in moonlight. And then, she's gone. You're left standing there, breadcrumbs on your robe, wondering if the world has officially lost its mind, or if this is what it feels like to wake up inside someone else's dream. You try to go back to your borrowed sleeping spot, but the ground feels less welcoming now. You lie awake, staring at the woven canopy above, tracing patterns in the fabric and questions in your head. Why would she offer herself to a man like that? How could she believe she could survive one night, let alone 1,000? What did she mean? Telling stories. You don't sleep again. Not really, because now you understand. The real tale hasn't even begun, and a small, scared part of you knows, deep in the cave of your chest, that Scheherazade isn't just walking into a marriage. She's walking into war. You don't know how long you've been sitting cross-legged in the palace courtyard, palms flat against the cool marble. But the sun is starting its slow, dramatic climb. It paints the stone in gold and blood orange, like it's trying to distract everyone from the quiet horror about to unfold. You lean back and squint toward the east wing, the royal chambers. Somewhere behind those walls, a girl is being dressed like an offering. Scheherazade, That name won't leave you alone. It loops in your head like a lullaby with teeth. You stand, brush dust off your robes, and wander back inside. The palace is buzzing now. Servants scurry like over-caffeinated ants, carrying bolts of silk, trays of dates, and baskets of rose petals. Musicians tune their strings in echoing courtyards, and beneath it all is a tension so sharp you could shave with it. Nobody's smiling. No one dares. You hear murmurs about the king, about the bride, about how the new wife won't live to see a second dawn. They say it in whispers that evaporate when anyone passes too close. But you catch the shape of the fear, familiar and hungry, and then you spot her father, the vizier. He's standing in a hallway, clutching a scroll like it might burst into flames at any second. His eyes are ringed with sleeplessness. You watch him for a beat too long, and suddenly his head snaps in your direction. You flinch, but he doesn't approach. He just turns and walks away fast. Curiosity wins. You follow. He moves through a narrow passage behind the library, clearly a route for servants, and you shadow him down twisting stairs until you reach a private chamber deep beneath the palace. It's quiet, dim, walls lined with parchment and oil lamps, a scholar's tomb. He turns. You shouldn't be here. You reply before thinking. Neither should your daughter. The vizier's face hardens like drying clay. She chose this. You let her. She made me swear not to stop her, not to warn the king, not to cry when I lay the wedding cloth across her shoulders. Your voice softens. She's going to die. She won't. The certainty in his voice isn't comforting. It's terrifying. She has a plan. I don't know what it is. But she said, Father, either I save the kingdom or I die trying. And if I fail, at least I'll die telling the truth. You stare. This man, worn thin by bureaucracy and grief, is standing in his cellar trusting in the impossible, trusting his daughter's words more than any sword or treaty. You're about to say something, maybe even apologize, when a servant appears at the top of the stairs. It's time. That's all. No fanfare. The vizier breathes in, folds the scroll carefully, and exits. You don't follow. You wander back up alone, limbs heavy, as if wrapped in wet cloth. The wedding procession isn't public, but you catch a glimpse through an arched hallway. Scheherazade is a ghost, wrapped in silk, eyes too calm for someone walking toward a blade. She doesn't look left or right, just forward. The king stands waiting, carved from stone, cold as the moon. The ceremony is short, just enough words to make the whole thing legal. Then she disappears behind thick, carved doors. You exhale like someone just let go of your throat. Historically, the practice of royal executions following nuptials isn't just a literary horror. It has echoes in real court rituals. Scholars point to ancient practices in Persia, India, and even East Africa, where brides or concubines were discarded, often fatally, after fulfilling ceremonial roles. Historians still argue whether 1001 Nights is dramatizing an existing practice or warning against an entirely symbolic misogyny. Either way, the story hits differently when you realize it may have roots in something real. You can't sleep again, so you wander the palace gardens at night, trying to shake the image of Scheherazade's calm gaze from your mind. You wonder what she's doing now, if she's already dead, if the guards will be scrubbing blood from the floor come sunrise. You sit by the fountain, staring at your warped reflection in the water, and try not to think too hard. Then, just as the sky begins to shift from indigo to pearl, you hear something, a voice, faint, musical, like wind singing through an hourglass. You turn. Above, in a tower window, A sliver of candlelight flickers, and the voice continues, soft, measured, hypnotic. It's her. You inch closer to the sound, careful not to alert the guards. You crouch behind a fig tree and listen. She's telling a story, not to herself, not into silence, but to someone. Him, the king. You freeze. The tale floats down like smoke. Ancient lands, shape-shifting demons, talking animals, clever tricks, and sweet revenge. Her voice rises and dips, dances and sighs, and you swear, even from this distance, you can hear the moment his breathing slows. The tension in him uncoils. She's doing it. She's surviving. You crouch there for what feels like hours, enraptured. Then the candle goes out. Silence. You wait. Nothing. Morning comes in gold sheets. You expect the worst, but no one comes to remove a body. There's no screaming, no guards with stretchers, and around noon, the servants start whispering something different. She's still alive. She made it. You want to shout. Instead, you smile like a man who just learned gravity isn't mandatory. It's begun. The real story. The impossible plan. The thread that just might unravel a tyrant's curse. And in the tower, one woman begins to reweave the kingdom, word by word, night by night. You wake to the sound of laughter, light, startled, like a bird flapping its wings for the first time. It's a strange thing in this palace, where joy has been rationed like water in a drought. You sit up too quickly, heart tapping a strange rhythm against your ribs. For a second, you think you've imagined it. But then you hear it again. Laughter. And this time, it's unmistakable. The king is laughing. You race down the corridor, careful not to draw too much attention. The guards are still stoic. The tapestries still weep dust and old perfume. But something in the air has shifted, like someone cracked a window in a room sealed too long. You pass a servant girl with wide eyes and an armful of figs, and she mouths. She's still alive. You don't ask who. You don't need to. Scheherazade. She lived through a second night, and already, the palace is turning. Conversations pause when she passes. People stare, not in horror, but in awe. She's not just surviving. She's staying. And she's doing it by talking. You steal back to your usual shadowy perch near the garden wall. And sure enough, as the moon laces silver across the courtyard, her voice rises again from the tower window. Tonight, the story's bigger, stranger. There's a fisherman and a djinni, but not just any djinni, a trickster, proud and dangerous, who threatens to kill the one who freed him. You lean in. The tale spills out like incense smoke, thick with magic, cleverness, and riddles. The king's silhouette, half lit by lantern glow, is completely still. He's listening the way a dying man drinks water. Then, just when the djinni lunges and the suspense coils tight, Scheherazade's voice stops. Just like that. Silence. You almost shout up at her. Finish it. Don't leave it there. But of course, that's the whole point. She leaves him hanging. She ends just before the climax, so the king must keep her alive to hear what comes next. And once again, morning arrives with no execution, no shrieking, no red-streaked marble, just tea and cautious hope. This is her game, and it's working. You start hearing whispers. Servants swap favorite bits of the stories, like trading cards. A cook swears she heard the king chuckle after last night's tale. Even the royal guards are quieter, gentler, less grim, one story at a time. She's undoing the nightmare. The original 1001 Nights, known as Alf Layla wa Layla, is a compendium of tales from Persian, Indian, Egyptian, and Mesopotamian roots. But the framing device, Scheherazada's desperate ploy to survive is its true genius. Historians still argue whether Scheherazade was ever a real person or purely literary. But what's undeniable is the structure she inspired. A tale within a tale, always unresolved, always tempting. It's the literary version of leaving your door slightly ajar and daring fate to walk through it. By the fourth night, Scheherazade's voice is more than a balm. It's an addiction. The king doesn't even pretend to resist. He invites her to dine with him now, in daylight, in public. Her chair is still humbler than his. Sure, but it's a chair. She's no longer just the bride of death. She's becoming something more dangerous. The bride of memory. Tonight, the tale picks up where it left off. The Jinni, tricked into a bottle again, rages and wails, but he's outwitted by a poor fisherman with nothing but his wits. Scheherazade's voice dances between characters like a puppeteer with invisible strings. But you notice something. She's not just telling stories. She's teaching. Her Jinni is a symbol, her fisherman a mirror. The tales aren't random, they're chosen. Chosen to make the king see himself, to remember who he used to be, who he could become. Each night now, the king listens a little longer. He eats a little slower. He looks a little less like a man hunting ghosts. And here's the twist. No one saw coming. She's not just saving herself. She's saving him. One night, as she recounts a tale of a cursed city, where every citizen turned to stone, you notice the king wince. He rubs his brow like trying to erase something burned too deep. The story ends, as always, at a critical moment. But the next morning, instead of ordering her execution, he sends away his advisors. He's thinking. You can see it. The king is thinking again. In medieval Islamic courts, storytelling wasn't just entertainment. It was political. Professional storytellers, called qasas, often delivered public sermons or tales laced with moral critiques, coded for those who knew how to listen. It wasn't just bedtime whimsy. It was resistance. Historians still debate whether Scheherazade's model reflects real political figures who resisted tyranny through coded speech. But the parallels are hard to ignore. By the sixth or seventh night, something truly wild happens. The king smiles, not a sneer, not a half smirk, a real smile. At something funny, she said. Something about a donkey in a turban trying to outwit a sultan. You can't believe it. The room feels lighter. The guards shift their feet like they're not used to oxygen. And you realize no one is holding their breath anymore. The king is still dangerous, still unpredictable. But now, there's something else under the surface. Regret, curiosity, even guilt. And every night, Scheherazade continues. Tales fold into tales. One opens into another like nesting boxes. She never runs out, so she never stumbles. It's like she was born for this. Like her soul has libraries. Instead of bones, the people begin to hope. Quietly, at first, you do too. One morning, as the sun slices gold through the jasmine trellises, you hear it again. She's still alive. It's not a whisper anymore. It's a chant, and so it goes. You again in your shadowed corner, watching the strange miracle unfold in the palace that once swallowed brides, like a well swallows coins. Except this coin, this girl with her quick tongue and bottomless tales, seems to be bouncing against the walls, refusing to sink. It's almost funny. Almost. If the stakes weren't still life and death, you'd think the king might grow bored. After all, how many tales can one woman have? But that's the trick, isn't it? She never truly ends one before slipping into the next. Like a magician pulling silks from her sleeve. Always one more. Always a brighter color. Tonight, she returns to the story of the second old man, the one with the two black dogs. You lean forward instinctively. You remember the first old man and his enchanted dear wife. That one was a mess of betrayal and curses, enough to make any soap opera seem tame. But this second tale, it promises something even stranger. You listen as she begins. There's a merchant, she says, older and wealthy, but childless and lonely. He adopts his brother's sons, raises them as his own, and builds a thriving business. But when he grows too old to travel, he entrusts the family fortune to his brothers and their children, asking only that they return with the goods, and with his share. Guess how that goes? They return all right, but not with riches. They come back penniless, deceit thick on their tongues, and soon after, they conspire to murder the old man, to steal what little he has left. Classic move. Scheherazade paints the scene with such richness that you can almost smell the salt of the harbor where the betrayal unfolds. The listener, the king, is utterly still, breathing through his nose like a man trying not to cry. It's subtle, but you see it. Her story is barbed with morality. She's handing him mirrors again, polished with fables. The treacherous brothers echo the king's own betrayal of trust, of innocent brides, of faith in love, of his own soul. But Scheherazade doesn't scold. She just tells and lets the truth sink in, like wine into linen. One historical fact: the motif of brothers betraying a noble sibling is found in multiple folk traditions, Greek, Indian, Persian, and often serves as a warning against misplaced trust. In ancient Persia, versions of this very story appeared in royal court readings, often intended to remind monarchs of the dangers of blind anger and poor judgment. One quirky tidbit: in some obscure variations of the tale, the dogs aren't brothers transformed, but enchanted lovers cursed to learn humility. Yeah, imagine that. Fetching and tail-wagging as moral punishment. You wonder how many royal listeners snorted into their goblets at that version. Scheherazade's tale continues with a twist. Just as the old man is about to be killed, he's saved by a passing jinni, but not without price. To thank the jinni, he returns every year to the place of his rescue. On the third year, he brings the black dogs, his transformed penitent brothers, along. That's where the tale ends, dangling like a half-tied knot. She's setting up her next night's bait. And here's the new twist you're starting to feel, deep in your bones. The king doesn't want the story to end. He's leaning forward more now. His usual furrowed brow is replaced by something softer. Uncertainty. Maybe even shame. You know what that looks like? Shame has a very particular shape. It's hunched and quiet, and can't look people in the eyes. Historians still argue whether the actual kings of the Islamic Golden Age, men like Harun al-Rashid, were ever affected by stories in this way. But evidence suggests that storytelling was used to advise rulers indirectly. Scholars, poets, and mystics would wrap political advice in layers of metaphor to dodge censorship or execution. Scheherazade, whether myth or model, becomes the ultimate symbol of such delicate resistance. Tonight, something even more unexpected happens. The king laughs again. Not a loud laugh, not disruptive, but it's there. Scheherazade has told a side anecdote, something about a parrot who won't stop tattling on his owner's wife. A strange, bitter little tale. But the way she delivers it, you'd laugh too. And then she drops another bomb. A third old man arrives in the story. Yes, another one. This one with his own cursed tail, and a different creature. A gazelle. If you're keeping score, Scheherazade weaves this third account in the same rhythm. But this time, you notice the king nodding. He's comparing the tales, trying to decode the hidden message. And that's how you know he's hooked. Not just by the stories, by her. And that is dangerous, because here's the thing about powerful men. They don't like not understanding something. But this king, to his credit, doesn't lash out. He leans in. He learns. You'd be proud if you weren't so nervous. Later that night, as you sneak back to your tiny quarters beneath the eaves, you catch two other servants whispering, she said something about fate. How it's like silk thread in the wind. Do you think she's cursed him? She doesn't have to. She's educating him. You almost laugh. Scheherazade, the quiet revolutionary, teaching an empire to breathe again. With nothing but her voice, on curious historical debate. Some believe Scheherazade's character was inspired by actual Persian court women, members of royal harems, who were more educated than most men, fluent in poetry, law, and philosophy. These women were not just ornamental. They advised from the shadows, composed political verse, even influenced policy through pillow talk and parables. Now imagine that knowledge packed into one girl, one mind, with one goal: survive and save her people from madness. You can't sleep that night, because now you're caught too, caught in the tales, in the slow unraveling of a kingdom, in the knowledge that sometimes the quietest voice in the room might be the most dangerous. You wake to the sound of morning bells, low and sonorous, drifting through the stone walls like an echo of something ancient. But it's not the bells that stir your thoughts. It's what lingers from the night before. That third old man, the one with the gazelle. You're still mulling over the transformation, the subtle weave of justice and mercy. How the stories seem to build on each other, like a soft staircase to something much bigger. And the king, well, he's different too. You pass him briefly in the corridor, just long enough to catch the shadow of a smile on his face. Not the cold grin you've come to associate with those early, brutal mornings. No, this one's almost human. You blink and it's gone, but it stays with you. The world inside the palace is shifting, just a little, like the breeze before a sandstorm, or the creak of timber before a ship turns in the current. Night falls again, and just as always, the chamber fills with that same velvet hush, that soft flicker of lamps, and the low sound of Scheherazade's voice threading its way into the king's mind, into yours. Tonight, she begins differently, not a continuation, not right away. First, a gentle return to the framing device, the merchant who has angered the jinni. She reminds the king, subtly, that every tale within the tale is still, somehow, part of the greater judgment being decided. You admire how she does it, not with a hammer, with a feather. Then she begins the tale of the fisherman and the jinni. Oh yes, this one, you lean forward, because this tale is wilder than most. A man, poor and weathered, casts his net 4 times into the sea. The first 3 times, junk, bones, clay pots, tangled weeds. You've had days like that. But the 4th, a brass jar, sealed with the mark of Solomon himself. You can almost hear the creak of the lid as it's forced open, the sudden rush of wind as a giant jinni explodes out in smoke and rage. And the twist? The jinni has been trapped for centuries, and he's not grateful. In fact, he's angry. So angry. He declares he'll kill the fisherman in thanks for his release. Yes, you heard that right. Gratitude apparently got lost somewhere, in those 100 years stuffed inside a jar. The fisherman, in a rare burst of boldness, plays it cool. He pretends to doubt the jinni's story. You, in that little jar, he says. Nah, not possible. And wouldn't you know it, the jinni, full of pride and thunderous ego, transforms back into smoke and slips into the jar just to prove it. Click. The fisherman reseals the lid. The lesson? Don't underestimate cleverness, or humility, or the power of a good trap. Scheherazade tells it with a sly grin in her voice. And for once, the king actually chuckles audibly. That's twice now in 2 nights. You feel like you're watching something fragile form, in real time, like a crust of ice cracking to reveal water underneath. Dangerous, but alive. Historical fact for this section. The genie in the bottle trope isn't original to the Arabian Nights. It appears in earlier Babylonian and Jewish folklore. In fact, the Seal of Solomon used in this tale has roots in real mystic traditions, where King Solomon was believed to control demons through magic rings and incantations. And here's your quirky tidbit. In medieval Islamic superstition, jinn were thought to inhabit lonely ruins and bathhouses. One popular belief warned people not to urinate in shady places or holes in the ground, because you might just be relieving yourself on a sleeping jinni. Talk about a bad morning. As Scheherazade tells the tale, she weaves another story into the fisherman's own. A tale within a tale within a tale. It's starting to feel like mental origami. She introduces a wise king named Yunnan, who suffers from leprosy. None of his doctors can cure him until a strange physician arrives, one who heals him not with potions, but with a clever trick involving a polo stick rubbed with medicine. The king holds the stick, plays a game, sweats, and boom. Cured. You'd think gratitude would follow. Right? Wrong. Enter the vizier. Now, if there's anything we've learned from 1,000 stories, it's this. Viziers are not to be trusted. This one whispers poison into the king's ear, convincing him that the doctor is dangerous, a spy, a magician, a threat. And so, the king, despite being healed, prepares to execute the man who saved his life. Sound familiar? Scheherazade doesn't draw the parallel out loud, but it hangs in the air like incense. The healed king who repays kindness with death? The listener doesn't need a map to find his own face in that mirror. Scholars still debate whether the tale of the physician and King Yunnan is a critique of actual court politics during the Abbasid Caliphate. There's some evidence that medical practitioners, often from minority or foreign backgrounds, were distrusted despite their skill. These tales may have served as cultural warnings about paranoia eating away at justice. Back in the story, the physician, wise to his fate, offers the king a final gift, a book. A simple request, read it after my death. The king agrees, has him killed, then opens the book. Nothing on the first page, or the second. But as he turns the pages, poisoned ink seeps into his skin. Within minutes, the king is dead. Justice. Delivered with paper and patience, Scheherazade lets the silence linger after that. Not long, just long enough for the message to settle in. Then, smoothly, she returns to the fisherman, because, surprise, he doesn't kill the jinni. Not yet. Instead, they strike a deal. The jinni leads him to a magical lake, full of colored fish, red, blue, yellow, white. The fisherman returns to the city, sells the fish, and brings them to the sultan, who demands they be cooked in his palace. But when the cook opens the pan, a black wall splits open, and a mysterious woman appears, speaks to the fish in poetry, then vanishes. Now this is peak weird. The fish answer her back, each in their own color-coded voice. Then the wall closes again. That's it. Scene. The king, eyes wide, demands the fisherman bring more of the same fish, which means we're heading deeper into the rabbit hole. But not tonight. Scheherazade smiles, closes her lips, and leans back on her pillow. Morning is moments away. The king doesn't argue, because now he needs to know. What was that woman? Why did she speak in verse? Why did the fish respond? And what lies beyond that black wall? You, of course, already know the real answer. More stories, always more stories. The next night arrives with less resistance than usual. The king doesn't glare, doesn't pace. He sits quietly, eyes trained on Scheherazade, as though her words have become a necessity. And let's be honest, you're feeling the same way. At this point, the stories have a gravity to them, something magnetic. They aren't just distractions, they're blueprints. Parables wrapped in velvet. Scheherazade clears her throat. No small talk, no recap. She continues as if she never stopped. You are back with the fisherman, standing before the astonished sultan, who demands answers. Why did that mysterious woman appear? Why did the fish respond like enchanted poets? The fisherman doesn't know. He's just a guy with a net. But the sultan? He's curious and suspicious. So, like any self-respecting monarch with trust issues and an excess of travel cloaks, he disguises himself and ventures with the fishermen to the lake where the magical fish dwell. When he sees them for himself, he's convinced something deeply wrong is happening in this realm. He follows the trail, across rocks, through forests, into the heart of a ruined city, surrounded by statues of stone men, frozen mid-motion, mid-scream. The palace at the center is empty, save for a young man, weeping on a throne, his body half marble, half flesh. And the moment the king enters, the man rises, slowly. You tense up instinctively. You expect a sword, a scream, maybe a magical trap. But instead, the young man bows and invites the king to sit beside him. And then he begins his story. Yes, a story within a story within a story within a story. We've now gone 4 layers deep. Somewhere, Christopher Nolan is taking notes. The youth, it turns out, was once a ruler himself, of the very city now reduced to stone. He fell in love with a beautiful woman, a sorceress, and she seemed to love him back. Spoiler, she didn't. One day, he caught her in an affair with a slave. Her response was not remorse or fear, it was fury. She cast a spell that turned him into a half-man, half-statue, unable to move from his throne. Then, she destroyed the entire population, transforming them into those silent statues. A city caught mid-breath. As for the fish, they are people too, citizens of 4 nearby cities, each now transformed into a lake, red, yellow, blue, white. Their colors reflect their former banners, now reduced to scales and gills. Historical side note, scholars have often seen this part of the tale as a metaphor for the rise and fall of city-states in the Islamic Golden Age. Cities that burned bright, collapsed overnight, or were silenced by tyrants, invaders, or betrayal from within. The metaphor of transformation, living people turned to stone or fish, might be fantasy, but it echoes a political reality. The king listens patiently, but he's already calculating. If this youth speaks truth, the kingdom is in danger of dark magic, beyond even his court's comprehension, so he decides to stay. Disguised still, he hides in the palace and spies on the sorceress. And what he sees confirms everything. She visits the throne room, speaking in syrupy tones to her husband, whom she believes to be unconscious. She weeps. She apologizes. She claims to love him. But as soon as she leaves the room, she dashes off to the dungeon where she's hidden her lover. The hypocrisy is almost theatrical. Actually, it's completely theatrical. The king takes his chance. He confronts the sorceress, armed not with weapons but with a demand. Fix this. Reverse what you've done. She laughs. She refuses. So he kills her. Swift, brutal, done. And then, the real magic begins. He sprinkles water drawn from a hidden well onto the youth's body. Slowly, flesh returns where marble once was. Movement returns to frozen limbs. The curse is broken. But not just that. The lake boils. The 4 fish cities begin to shimmer and ripple. One by one, they dissolve into human form. Men and women crawling from the water's edge, blinking in the sun, unsure of how long they've been trapped in their scaled prisons. There's a strange poetry in it. Liberation through violence. Redemption through death. Even in fairy tales, freedom rarely comes cleanly. Quirky tidbit for this section. Medieval Arabic literature often gave magic a dual identity, both a spiritual force and a scientific curiosity. There were treatises, actual manuals on how to create invisibility cloaks, flying machines, and yes, how to summon or imprison jinn. So while the idea of a cursed city might feel outlandish, it actually reflects a literary tradition that took magic semi-seriously, as both metaphor and pseudo-science. Back in the story, the youth thanks the king and offers him the throne, insisting that the former sultan has proven himself wiser than most rulers. The king declines, but ensures the youth becomes the new ruler of the United Cities. Fish no more, statue no more. He's a monarch reborn. Scheherazade lets the story settle into stillness for a moment, and then she quietly reminds the king of where they started. Back to the fisherman. You had almost forgotten him. Now rich, now respected. The fisherman continues to thrive, thanks to the blessings of the once cursed fish and his pact with the now vanquished Jinni. What started as a desperate act, throwing a net into the sea, became a story so sprawling, it practically rewrote reality. The king leans back in his cushions. You do too. Somewhere deep in your mind, you feel a question rising, something that's been echoing faintly through every tale. A test, a warning. What kind of ruler do you become when you're the one with the power? Scheherazade never says it outright, but it's there, in every spell, every twist of fate, every death that might have been avoided with a little more listening and a little less stabbing. Historians still argue whether the tale of the fisherman was purely allegorical or had roots in actual urban folklore, told among the laboring classes of Baghdad or Cairo. What's clear is that it resonated. It's one of the earliest to be translated in full into European languages during the Enlightenment, and you can see why. It has all the ingredients: poor man, angry spirit, trickster logic, ancient revenge, magical lakes, tragic love, political betrayal. It's a buffet, but more than that, it sticks the landing. The curse ends. The king learns. The people are freed. If only all histories could resolve that neatly. You're lying back now, eyes half-lidded, but the story tugs you forward like a tide. Scheherazade is still speaking, still weaving. The king, yes, the one who has been listening to her for over a fortnight now, is shifting in tone. He doesn't cut her off anymore. He doesn't remind her of her fate. He listens, and you do too. Because the next tale, well, it loops back. You've heard whispers of it before. Remember the merchant who killed a Jinni's son with a date pit? We're returning to that story now. Not to the merchant himself, but to one of the strange witnesses who intervened on his behalf. A man with 2 black dogs. That's right. It's finally time for the second old man. You follow him now. Footsteps muffled across desert sand. He's older than old. Eyes that have seen dynasties rise and fall. And behind him trail 2 dogs, black as night. their eyes glinting with something more than canine loyalty. He offers to tell his story to the Jinni in exchange for 1/3 of the merchant's life. And the Jinni, ever one for a good tale, agrees. So the old man begins. Once upon a time, of course, it was not two dogs. It was two brothers. Human, flesh and bone and pride. He, the eldest, was a merchant, wealthy, cautious, and deliberate. His brothers, not so much. Reckless with money, greedy for shortcuts. You know the type. He gives them half his fortune. Out of love, out of that old belief that blood is thicker than coin. They set out for business ventures of their own, and within a few short years, lose everything and come back to him, penniless, twice. Historical fact. This divide and lose scenario is a recurring theme in both 1001 Nights and broader Islamic folklore. In a period where trade routes defined wealth and inheritance often led to disaster, the idea of a generous patriarch, tricked by his own kin, struck a deep cultural nerve. Trade families in Baghdad or Damascus would have seen this story as a cautionary tale wrapped in metaphor. The old man doesn't abandon them. He forgives. He funds. He allows the cycle to continue, and then he falls in love. You can feel the sand shift under your feet as the story turns. It's subtle, like a breeze changing direction. He meets a woman, mysterious, quiet, eyes like a storm behind a veil. He marries her. They are happy, but his brothers, they hate it. They see her as a threat to their safety net. And one day, while he's away on business, they seize their chance. They steal her jewelry, beat her, tie her up, and throw her into the sea. Yeah, subtlety isn't their strong suit. The man returns to find his home empty. No wife, no brothers, no clues. He grieves for months, maybe years. And then, one evening, a Jinni appears in a gust of wind and sorrow. She is weeping and bleeding and furious. You guessed it. His wife wasn't just any woman. She was a sorceress, a powerful one. The sea didn't kill her. It taught her. She returns not as a victim, but as a storm cloaked in skin. She tells him everything. She knows what must be done, but she doesn't kill the brothers. No. She turns them into dogs, two big, brooding, guilt-laced creatures. And she commands her husband, keep them with you for 10 years. Let them learn obedience, loyalty, silence, not as punishment, but as penance. Quirky tidbit. In several lesser-known manuscripts of the Nights, the dogs are sometimes described not as brothers, but as cursed spirits, representing dual aspects of the man's own guilt or indecision. A kind of walking Jungian shadow with floppy ears. So, the old man does as she asks. They travel together, town to town. Him, speaking politely. Them, trailing behind, silent and watchful. He doesn't hate them. Not even now. That's the strange part. You expect fury, but he speaks with tiredness. The weight of too many years spent hoping others would change. He ends his story right there, before the Jinni and the merchant. The Jinni, clearly moved, agrees. 1/3 of the merchant's life is granted. You lean back. Let the dogs lie. Scheherazade pauses, but the king doesn't blink. He's hooked, clearly. So she moves forward again, this time with the third old man. Yes, there's still another witness to account for. But that's for tomorrow night. Tonight, you're left with the image of a man walking through the world, trailed by the sins of others, leashed not by hate, but by duty. A man who keeps his word, even when his brothers don't deserve it. Historians still debate whether the sorceress in this story represents justice, vengeance, or just narrative convenience. Some scholars argue she was inserted later into the tale to add a mystical resolution. Others claim she echoes ancient goddesses of retribution, like Ishtar or Sekhmet, repurposed in Islamic dress. You're not sure which is true, but you do know this: those dogs, they're still walking. Somewhere in the dust, somewhere in the margins of forgotten cities. And if you listen closely, you might hear their claws clicking quietly just behind you. You don't even realize you're still holding your breath. The second old man's tale has uncoiled like a desert serpent, slow, sad, and strangely sticky. It lingers, but Scheherazade doesn't pause long. The king leans in closer, the hours slipping by, and before he can even think to end her life, onward she goes. The third old man steps forward now, leaning heavily on a staff, the kind of gnarled wood that's seen years and weather. He's older than the other two, possibly older than time. His beard is long enough to braid into a ladder, his robes draped in dust and travel. But there's something else, something curious perched on his shoulder. A deer, yes, a full-grown gazelle, delicate and silent, nestled as though she belongs there. Her wide black eyes take in the jinni, the merchant, the scene, all of it. And you can't help but feel that she knows everything before it's said. The jinni, intrigued as ever, allows the third old man to speak. And so, the final tale begins. He says he once had brothers, two of them again. A repeating motif. You notice, maybe the Knights has a thing for threes. This time, the trio were all merchants. Rich ones. The kind who'd argue over which of their caravans had more camels or shinier spices. They decided to pool their wealth and set out together for trade. Three brothers, one goal. And for a time, it works. They're successful, more successful than anyone around them. They trade in silk and sandalwood, in pearls and perfumes. Their names are whispered in markets from Samarkand to Cairo. But of course, it can't last. Here's your historical fact. During the Islamic Golden Age, joint family merchant ventures like this were common across Central Asia and the Middle East. Trust within kinship-based contracts was crucial, but it also often led to spectacular collapses when jealousy entered the equation. Letters found in the Cairo Geniza reveal real disputes between trading brothers who bankrupted each other over perceived slights. And so it happens here. The youngest brother, our storyteller, is careful with his books, meticulous. He reinvests wisely, saves often. The older two, not so much. One invests in scented oils that go rancid during a sandstorm. The other buys carpets from a dealer who turns out to be a con artist, promised Persian silk, received goat hair woven by someone's grumpy cousin. When their fortunes dwindle, they come to him for help, and he, like the old men before him, gives it willingly, even gladly, because family, and they betray him. Again, are you noticing a pattern? But this story shifts. One of the brothers, angry, desperate, slips something into his drink. He wakes up alone in the wilderness, stripped of everything, even his name, in a way. The deer, yes, the deer perched calmly on his shoulder finds him there, alone and dazed, because she wasn't always a deer. She was once his cousin's daughter, or perhaps a distant niece. Depends on the version. She had been studying the magical arts in secret, because in many parts of the ancient Islamic world, particularly Persia and the Maghreb, women with mystical knowledge were viewed with suspicion. She knew how to speak to animals, how to read the language of wind, how to draw runes on sand that glowed faintly at night. Fringe tidbit: in a rare 15th century variant of this tale from North Africa, The woman who becomes the deer is also an astronomer. She charts the movement of stars with sea-polished stones and whispers her equations to the moon. She finds him broken and turns herself into a deer so she can travel with him undetected. They journey together for months, maybe years, across burning dunes and moss-choked marshes, until they reach a city where magic is not feared, but welcomed. There, she finds a way to protect them both from the curses of his brothers. She teaches him patience, teaches him to see the world sideways, teaches him that revenge is a cold, heavy thing, not worth carrying in the desert heat. Eventually, he becomes rich again, but quietly this time. Modest shop, modest living. He earns, he gives, but never loudly. And he keeps the deer close, not as a pet, but as a guardian, a reminder, a companion in silence. Historians still argue whether this tale was originally intended to be part of the Three Old Men sequence, or grafted on later by storytellers hungry for symmetry. The earliest manuscripts of 1001 Nights often diverge here. Some omit the third man entirely, while others give him a far darker, bloodier ending. But in Scheherazada's version, the man ends simply. With dignity, he looks the Jinni in the eye and asks only that his story, too, be accepted in exchange for a portion of the merchant's life. And the Jinni agrees. 3 stories, 3 rescues. You're noticing now, so is the king probably, that these aren't just stories. They're puzzles, mirrors. You hold one up to the next, and each reflects something different. Regret, mercy, the echo of poor choices. It's not about magic. Not really. It's about how people handle betrayal when it sleeps next to them every night. And just like that, the merchant is released. He thanks the 3 old men. He thanks the Jinni. He goes home. You're about to drift off now, right? But no, Scheherazade has more. The king is too curious. His heart, like yours, is starting to shift. Night by night, story by story. And you suspect it's not just the tales, it's the teller, because she's weaving something bigger than just a distraction. She's weaving redemption. But hey, that's tomorrow night's adventure, isn't it? The night deepens, and the fire in your mind flickers low. But Scheherazade's voice doesn't. It carries on, smooth as a silk drawn through fingers, warm as tea you forgot you were sipping. The king sits forward again, caught, unwilling to end what might just be the most interesting thing in his life. And you, still drifting, but not asleep, are taken into the next chapter. The merchant has returned home, spared by 3 strangers and a Jinni with a flexible moral code. But the tale doesn't rest here. No. Scheherazade's mind wanders ahead like a cat on rooftops. And it lands this time in the court of a different king, a mad king, a brother. You remember Shahryar, right? The one who marries and kills every night? Well, he has a brother named Shah Zaman. And surprise, he's not doing great either. Scheherazade doesn't start from the beginning again. She weaves the threads she already cast, pulling Shah Zaman into the tapestry like it was always part of the same pattern. Which, in this world, it kind of is. So here's how that thread unravels. Shah Zaman rules a smaller kingdom. He's invited to visit his brother Shahryar after a long separation. And though he sets out with royal enthusiasm, he forgets something and returns home midway. That's when things go sideways. He walks in on his wife, being extremely unfaithful, with a kitchen servant no less. Yikes. He reacts the way early medieval kings often did, rashly and permanently. His wife and her lover are executed. The historians note marital betrayal among royalty was considered not just scandalous, but a threat to divine order. Monarchs weren't just rulers. They were symbols of cosmic harmony. A cheating queen? That's like knocking over the North Star. So, heartbroken, humiliated, Shah Zaman continues his journey to Shahriyar's palace. But once there, he notices something curious. His brother seems sad, broken, not just royal bored or lion wounded, but genuinely hollow, like someone scooped the joy out of him with a ladle. Eventually, Shah Zaman discovers the cause. Shahriyar's queen had betrayed him, too. But in her case, it wasn't just once, it was nightly. She held secret feasts in the garden with servants and lovers, and who knows what. He caught her, executed her, and then, in a breathtaking leap of logic, decided that all women were evil. Yes, you've heard this before, but now we circle back, this time with more texture, more ache. You see how the two brothers reflect each other, like twin moons on opposite shores, each betrayed, each furious. But Shahriyar takes it further. Instead of retreating into mourning, he crafts a ritual of vengeance, one new bride every night, one execution every dawn, every single day, a fringe tidbit. Some scholars believe this ritual mirrors pre-Islamic sacrifice myths, where kings or gods required virgin offerings to maintain balance or fertility. The comparison is uncomfortable, but it lingers in the shadows of the story. Undeniable. Scheherazade lets you sit with that for a while. She doesn't rush. She doesn't lecture. She just lets the horror of it bleed slowly, like ink in water. Because this is the context, the soil from which her entire story grows. She wasn't chosen randomly. She volunteered, daughter of the vizier, educated, brilliant, and possibly mad. She hatches a plan so fragile, it sounds like something out of a high-wire act over a volcano. She tells her father she wants to marry the king. Her father weeps, pleads, argues, but she insists. Why? Not for glory, not for love, but because she believes stories can save lives. That might sound absurd to you now. But remember, this was a world where storytelling wasn't just entertainment. It was preservation. It was religion. It was law, history, memory, and identity. In ancient Baghdad or Cairo or Damascus, a well-told tale could earn you coins, lovers, or forgiveness. She goes to the king, knowing what comes next. And yet, when dawn breaks after their first night, she's not executed. Why? Because she stops her story mid-sentence. She hooks him, leaves him dangling. She weaponizes curiosity, and in doing so, she stalls death. Historians still argue whether Scheherazade's name was original to the Knights or added later. Some say it means city-born or noble lineage. Others trace it to a Persian term for child of the moon. No one agrees. But what they do agree on is this. She changed the entire structure of the collection. Before Scheherazade, the stories were disjointed, fragmented. After her, they gained shape, a nested labyrinth, stories within stories, each one a lifeline. And that's the moment you're in now. She's bought herself another night, with one tale, and now, with three. And the king, he doesn't know what's happening to him yet, but his heart is changing. Like yours, slowly, quietly, you imagine Scheherazade lying beside him. The silence between them thick, the sword not yet drawn. Her voice soft, calm, unafraid. Tomorrow, she'll tell him something else, something stranger, maybe funnier, maybe darker, but always, always human. You blink, your room dim, that background hum still whispering like distant wind across dunes. You're not quite sure if it's Scheherazade talking anymore, or your own thoughts curling around hers. But one thing's certain, you want to hear what happens next. So here you are, 20 nights in, and the tapestry Scheherazade weaves has grown enormous, threaded with lions and ghouls, betrayed kings and chatty demons, and now a tale of two brothers rotting from within. And yet, for all their power, all their sword-flashing tantrums, it's a single woman with a calm voice and a good memory who's slowly turning history on its head. The second old man's story still hangs unfinished in the air. Remember him? The one with the two black dogs trailing behind, silent as sins. Yeah, him. The Jinni has demanded to know why he's offered 1/3 of his life to spare the merchants. So, the old man sits on a rock, the dogs flanking him, and begins, once, he says, I had 2 brothers, good men, or so I thought. We were all merchants, born to a father who split his wealth 3 ways before passing into whatever afterlife accountants go to. I set off and built my fortune the honest way, hard work, clever trade, and maybe a bit of luck involving a spice deal and an inattentive customs officer. Years later, I returned rich, bags of gold, silks packed so tightly they squeaked, perfumes strong enough to stun a camel. And what did my brothers do? They plotted. Greed, that old boring villain, wormed its way into their hearts. They invited me on a journey, a family trip. They said, yeah, a boat trip. You can probably guess what happened next. They waited until we were deep at sea, then tossed me overboard like expired cargo. If it weren't for the crate of indigo dye I clung to, I'd be fish food. I drifted ashore, broke but alive. And while I coughed seawater and resentment, they returned home with my goods and told everyone I'd been eaten by pirates, or possibly lions, maybe pirate lions. Here, Scheherazade slips in a mainstream historical fact, like a whisper under the story. In early Islamic maritime law, family betrayal wasn't considered just criminal. It was seen as a tear in the social fabric, a spiritual offense against the ummah, the community. Sibling treachery? That was beyond reprehensible. It risked divine wrath. So what did I do? The old man continues. Did I curse the heavens? Did I swear vengeance? No. I rebuilt, quietly, patiently, and just when I was back on my feet, guess who came begging? My brothers. Their fortunes had collapsed like badly stacked rugs. They wanted help, and like a fool, or maybe a saint, I gave it. I brought them into my house, shared my bread, my roof, my table, but they were unchanged. Envy doesn't die easy. One night, while I was sleeping, they struck again, this time with sorcery. They stole my wealth, and when I confronted them, they turned my beloved wife into a gazelle, and me into something not quite human. For weeks I wandered, neither beast nor man, until I found a wise woman in the desert who undid their curse. You shift a little in your bed, realizing something strange. The dogs, the 2 that follow him, they don't bark, they don't sleep, they only watch. The old man glances toward them now and says, as punishment, I turned them into these black dogs you see, and they've followed me ever since. Scheherazade lets that line hang. Historians still argue whether this tale was originally Persian, Indian, or product of old Arab tribal folklore. Its themes, sibling betrayal, transformation, as divine retribution, magical punishment, crop up in multiple traditions, often with regional spices. One version has the brothers become goats. Another, silent shadows cast by no body. Either way, the Jinni is intrigued. He leans forward. And then, after a breath of silence that could chill boiling tea, he says, "Your story is strange indeed. For it, I grant the merchant a second third of his life." Another ripple of disbelief. The merchant, who has gone pale like old parchment, is suddenly 1/3 freer. The tension softens, but not much. There's still a third old man. Remember, he's been quiet all this time, sitting cross-legged with a parrot on his shoulder and a deer at his side. Not a dog this time. No. His animals speak in different metaphors, but you'll get there. For now, you think back to the story. The old man who was betrayed twice, cursed, and still forgave. Well, sort of. He kept the brothers as dogs. Sure. But at least he didn't barbecue them. A quirky footnote: in medieval Cairo, pet monkeys were popular among the elite, but black dogs, not so much. Black dogs were associated with demons in many Islamic folk beliefs, often avoided, sometimes even feared. To be cursed as a black dog? That wasn't just punishment. That was spiritual humiliation. The merchant listens with wide eyes, somewhere between relief and dread. He knows the Jinni isn't exactly predictable. He knows another tale must come. Another strange, painful past must unfold before the sun rises fully. And Scheherazade, she doesn't miss a beat. You barely notice the transition. One moment you're in a tent with a cursed man and his dogs. The next, you're somewhere else entirely. Somewhere with sand in your shoes and a talking deer batting its long lashes at the firelight. The king shifts in his silks, not speaking, not blinking. And you've forgotten the ceiling, the hum of your fan, the weight of your blanket. You're caught, just like him, because it turns out stories don't need swords to kill time. They only need a good voice and someone to listen. The fire crackles, casting long shadows over the faces of those still awake. The merchant, with 2/3 of his life, returned like coins from a fountain, now turns toward the third old man, the one with the deer and the parrot, and a silence heavy as sandbags. You might think, at this point, he'd rush into his tale, eager to claim the final third of the merchant's life. But no. This last man, robed in sunset-colored wool, takes his time. He adjusts his parrot's perch, brushes something invisible from the deer's velvet ears, and then, finally, says, "Mine is a tale of love, and punishment, and a kind of justice I still question." You lean into the pillow. This one starts soft. He was a learned man. He says, no merchant, no warrior, a reader of books, a solver of riddles. He lived in a tall, thin house beside a canal, with a wife who was the sort of beautiful doe that poets run out of metaphors for. She had a mind sharper than most scholars, a laugh that could unsettle entire libraries, and, perhaps unfortunately, she had secrets. He married her for love, but love, as you well know, can be a trap disguised as a gift. It started with whispers from the servants, strange disappearances, long walks alone, locked doors. He dismissed them all until the deer came. Yes, the deer. One day, he returned home to find a graceful doe, with eyes like gilt, standing in the center of the courtyard. His wife was nowhere to be found, and the parrot, his wife's pet, was the only creature willing to speak. How she was unfaithful. The bird squawked. She conspired with a sorcerer. They planned to steal your knowledge, your books, your power. Modern scholars might note, parrots don't typically tattle on humans, but in Islamic folklore, birds often serve as divine messengers. Remember the hoopoe in the Quran, who delivers a warning to the Queen of Sheba? A talking parrot might raise eyebrows in science, but not in storytelling. Still, The old man didn't want to believe it. He questioned everyone, searched every room, and then, in a hidden drawer, beneath layers of cedar-scented clothes, he found letters, magic scripts, drawings, spells, all in her hand. The parrot had told the truth, and the deer was his wife. It was her lover, it turned out, who cursed her in a jealous rage when she hesitated to betray her husband. He transformed her into a creature of silence and fled. Here, a mainstream historical detail gently lands. In Abbasid Baghdad, magical texts and grimoires were not only common, but often copied in secret among the elite. The caliph's court even had official translators dedicated to bringing in magical knowledge from Persia and India. Despite public denouncements, magic was both forbidden and irresistible. So, what did the husband do? He didn't strike her. He didn't scream. Instead, he studied. For weeks, he locked himself in his library. Parchments stacked like towers, ink staining his fingers black. Until one night, he stepped outside, spoke words no living creature understood, and turned the fleeing sorcerer into a parrot. A fair exchange, he says, stroking the bird's feathers. And her? The merchant asks. The old man sighs, looking at the deer. She walks beside me now. She remembers everything. And so do I. Historians still argue whether this tale is a coded metaphor for marital betrayal, a satire of Baghdad's courtly romances, or simply a bedtime warning against mixing love with magic. Some versions of the story end with the woman fully restored, others with her roaming the earth for eternity. I offered the final third of this man's life, the old man says quietly, because I know how easily a soul can break, and how rarely it heals straight. The Jinni, silent until now, finally moves. You have all told strange tales. It says, I am satisfied. It turns to the merchant, whose heart has probably shrunk 3 sizes from the stress. Your life is restored, in full, just like that. No thunderclap, no dramatic smoke. The Jinni vanishes, and the 3 old men? They bow and disappear into the morning mist. Dogs and deer and parrots trailing behind like ghosts in a slow parade. You think you're safe now. You think it's over. But then you remember the storyteller herself. Back in the palace, Scheherazade takes a quiet breath. She's survived another dawn. The king, spellbound yet again, waves her to continue. Tomorrow. And you're still here, still under the weight of layered stories. Brothers turned to beasts, women changed into deer, men punished by their own mercy. It's not just fairy tales, it's survival logic, wrapped in metaphor. And somewhere deep in all that dust and incense, you realize this. The stories Scheherazade tells aren't just to delay death. They're maps of the human condition in disguise. One quirky tidbit before the soft landing. A 14th century manuscript found in Cairo included marginal notes where readers debated whether the Jinni's judgments were emotionally fair, as if they were annotating a reality show. It seems even then, people couldn't resist being armchair judges. And now, at last, you're floating. The palace fades. The Jinni is gone, and only the echo of Scheherazade's voice remains. Let it all soften now. The gold-trimmed palaces, the whispering wings of parrots, the salt sting of betrayal, all of it dims, like candles winking out one by one across a desert plain. The sand no longer burns beneath your feet. The stories drift, folding in on themselves like paper boats lost to time. You hear the quiet hush of the sea again, not threatening, but restful, safe. Even Scheherazade, with her endless reservoir of tales, lowers her voice. There will be more stories tomorrow. There are always more. But for now, you can let go. You've wandered through curses and kindness, through cities both real and imagined, and returned whole. You've watched the stars shift from one roof to another. And now, they gently fade behind your eyelids, so breathe a little slower, sink a little deeper. There's nothing left to chase. Just sleep, just dreams, just the promise of a tale waiting when the light returns.